Real estate investment. I found out through an overheard conversation at a charity auction. Meredith and her husband were arguing. Behind a curtain, his voice a frustrated whisper, hers sharp as glass. We can't lose this place, Tom. If the club folds, we lose everything. It was almost poetic. Within weeks, I had my lawyer, Ethan, dig into the club's ownership structure. A mess, but a manageable one. 7 board members, for eager to sell, to hesitant. One the president unaware that a storm was forming under his Italian loafers. You really want to buy the whole thing? Ethan asked me over coffee one morning. Not buy, I said. Rescue. He laughed. For $15 million, you could buy an island. An island doesn't come with Meredith Blythe's face when she realizes who owns her paradise. We made the offer quietly, through a holding company. Cash, clean, no publicity. Within a month, I own controlling interest. The signatures came in one by one, a symphony of greed disguised as relief. The ink dried, and the country club, the temple of my rejection, was mine. The next morning, I drove up to the gates in the same car, Winston in the passenger seat. The guard, who once waved me off, nearly dropped his clipboard when I handed him the new ownership documents. Sir, I didn't realize. Nobody did, I said, stepping out. The air smelled of pine and money. Winston barked once, tail wagging, as if sensing victory. Time for a few renovations. I didn't start with destruction. I started with subtlety. The poolside bar became a juice stand. The steakhouse switched to vegan options. The dress code was lifted. I told the staff they could bring their pets to work. At first, people thought it was eccentricity. The whispers started new, owners crazy, probably some nouveau rich idiot. Then came the announcement. Effective immediately, I said at the board meeting, my tone calm, measured, and lethal. The Westlake Country Club will be rebranded as the Winston Grounds, a private off-leash dog sanctuary. All current memberships are nullified. The property will be repurposed for animal welfare. Meredith's face went pale. You can't do that, she hissed. Oh, but I already have. She stood, hands trembling. This is our community. You can't just turn it into a place where everyone is welcome, I said, especially those who were never allowed in. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost of her own making. Why? She whispered. I smiled faintly. Because you told me I didn't belong. That night, I walked through the empty club under the glow of the terrace lights. The chairs were stacked, the pool drained. The echoes of laughter had gone silent. Winston ran ahead, sniffing at every corner, like a conqueror exploring his new kingdom. I felt no guilt, only clarity. Some empires deserve to fall, and sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from their ruins. By dawn, the landscapers arrived. The tennis courts became fenced agility parks. The fairways, once manicured for the rich, became trails for rescue dogs too. Run free. A small team of volunteers gathered people who'd never afford a club membership, yet showed up with leashes and smiles. I watched from the veranda as the first dogs arrived. Big ones, small ones, broken ones. They bounded across the grass that had once been forbidden to anyone without a surname on the donor wall. And then, of course, Meredith came. She stood at the edge of the field, immaculate in white, heels sinking into the dirt. Her eyes glistened with disbelief as a golden retriever splashed through the fountain where her annual charity photos used to be taken. You're insane, she whispered. Maybe, I said softly. But look how happy they are. Her gaze flickered to Winston, who barked joyfully at her, tail wagging. For a second, just a flicker, something soft in her face. But pride was stronger. She turned sharply and walked away. Première l'étergot? The gates closed behind her, but this time they weren't keeping anyone out. They were keeping joy in. Matt murdi dinsi pire nature. In Westlake Hills, she had spent 2 decades weaving herself into every committee, every whisper of local influence, every room that mattered. So when I bought the country club, the cathedral of her social dominance, it wasn't just a blow to her ego. It was a public dethroning. The first week after the announcement, she tried charm. She showed up at my house, all pearls and perfume, pretending the last year hadn't happened. I was sitting on my porch with Winston, watching him chase leaves, when her black Range Rover rolled up the drive. Matthew, she said as she stepped out, her voice honey over steel. We need to talk. I didn't rise from my chair. We said everything that needed saying at the club. Meredith, she smiled, the kind of smile meant for fundraising galas and photo ops. I think we both acted a little rashly. You are new to the area. You don't understand how things work here. The country club, well, it's not just a business, it's a legacy. And legacies can be negotiated. I asked, are you here to buy it back? Her chin lifted slightly. If that's what it takes. I laughed, a sound I didn't mean to let escape but couldn't hold back. You think I did this for money? I think everyone does everything for money. Eventually, I set my glass down. Then you still don't get it. Her expression flickered. You're making a mistake. Matthew, people talk. You might think this little stunt is charming, but you're alienating an entire community. Investors, homeowners, everyone who matters, I repeated slowly. Right, the way she said that word matters hit like a spark on dry leaves. For her, people without status were background noise. She looked at me the way she probably looked at her gardener. A temporary inconvenience. I'm not building this for them, I said. I'm building it for the ones who were never invited. Her eyes hardened. You think you're some kind of hero. This circus you've created isn't noble. It's petty, maybe, I said, but it's honest. She held my gaze for a long time, then turned toward her car. You regret they did. Premier se soft plantain. Wedge noticed her knuckles on the steering wheel. That was the thing about people like Meredith. They didn't know how to lose. By the next week, she'd gone public. Articles started to appear in the Westlake Herald and online forums. Local entrepreneur destroys beloved institution. New owner's radical plan sparks outrage. Anonymous sources claimed the dogs were dangerous, the grounds unsanitary, and the neighborhood in decline. But I was ready. I'd hired a PR firm before the purchase even closed. For every angry op-ed, we released. To human interest pieces, rescue dogs find hope in luxury setting. Once exclusive club becomes sanctuary for abandoned pets. Photos of wagging tails and smiling volunteers spread faster than her gossip ever could. Still, the pressure mounted. HOA meetings filled with murmurs and accusations. I received anonymous letters about preserving the neighborhood's dignity. One even arrived with clipped magazine, letters spelling out "Get out." It was ridiculous. Almost theatrical, but I kept every single one in a box labeled belonging. One night, as I was walking Winston through the empty fairway under a swollen moon, I heard footsteps crunching behind me. You know, she won't stop, Ethan said, appearing from the darkness. He was carrying a thermos of coffee, wearing that same weary lawyer, look half concern, half curiosity. She can try, I said. She's already talking to the city council about zoning violations, noise complaints. Environmental ordinances. Let her, I said, tossing Winston's ball. Every time she pushes, I'll push back harder. Ethan sighed. You're enjoying this too much. Maybe, I admitted. But for once, I'm the one writing the rules. He looked around the field, where a dozen kennels were being built. You could have just started a foundation, you know. Donated to a shelter. Why go this far? I thought about that for a long moment. The breeze carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass and memory. Because, I said finally, I wanted her to see what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. A week later, Meredith escalated. She held a Save Westlake rally on the front lawn of her estate. 100 people showed up, neighbors, former club members, and socialites dressed like they were attending a wedding instead of a protest. She stood on a raised platform with a microphone, her voice amplified across the manicured lawns. This is about more than one man's vanity project, she declared. This is about preserving our community's integrity. The crowd cheered. I watched the livestream from my office at the Winston grounds, sipping coffee, amused. The irony was delicious. She was fighting for community now, the same woman who spent her life dividing it. But then she crossed a line. A clip surfaced that night. Someone in her circle had filmed her saying, "He's not one of us. He doesn't belong here." People like that never do. People like that. That phrase went viral. By morning, national media picked it up. The comments poured in. She's a snub. Let the dogs have their park. Finally, someone standing up to the rich. Meredith's image crumbled overnight. The PR firm I'd hired didn't even need to spin it. All we did was post one photo, me kneeling beside Winston, surrounded by rescue dogs, with the caption, "Everyone deserves a place to belong." The internet did the rest. By the end of the week, donations flooded in from across the country. Celebrities retweeted. Local shelters reached out for partnerships. What began as revenge was turning into something purer, something I hadn't expected, an actual movement. But revenge is a tricky creature. Once you feed it, it doesn't stop asking for more. The next month, I was invited to a city gala, the same kind of event Meredith once ruled. Reporters asked about my vision, politicians praised my innovation, and there she was, sitting 2 tables away, wearing that same pearl necklace, pretending to be unbothered, while her world quietly eroded. Our eyes met across the room. She raised her glass, a mock toast. I returned it, smiling. Later, she cornered me near the exit. Her tone was brittle. "You win," she said. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" I shook my head. "No, Meredith, I didn't want to win. I just wanted you to understand." "Understand what?" "That kindness doesn't make someone lesser. That gate you built, it was never real." "You made people believe it was." She stared at me, eyes glistening but hard. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said. "Just freer." When she turned to leave, her shoulders sagged for the first time. Knowing the fiat recognition. As she disappeared into the crowd, I realized the strangest thing of all. I didn't hate her anymore. Butadienst over. Because Meredith Blythe wasn't done losing, yet and the Winston grounds was about to become much bigger than either of us ever imagined. The storm began 2 months later, not with thunder but with paper, stacks of it, stamped, signed, and delivered in heavy cream envelopes that smelled faintly of power and desperation. Westlake Hills v. Winston Grounds Animal Sanctuary. À la suite. 76 pages accusing me of zoning violations, environmental disturbances, and unauthorized commercial redevelopment, the kind of bureaucratic dagger meant to bleed you slowly. Ethan dropped the envelope on my desk, expression grim. "She's pulling every string. She has left," he said. "City Council, Neighborhood Association, even the State Wildlife Board. She's throwing money at everyone." "Let her," I said, flipping through the pages without reading them. "You can't sue empathy." He frowned. "You can if empathy has a property line." I leaned back in my chair, watching Winston snore under the window. The light slanted in golden, warm against the old wood floors that used to echo with golf, shoes and entitlement. Outside, volunteers were laughing, playing fetch with a pack of rescue dogs. A place once sterile, with privilege, now pulsed with life. "She's scared," I said quietly. "That's all this is. Fear wearing legal perfume." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Matthew, be serious. She's got connections at the mayor's office. They're talking about revoking your development permit. So, if that happens, you'll have to shut down the sanctuary." I looked out the window, at the rolling hills, at the dogs chasing each other under the sunlight that belonged to no one. "Then we fight." And we did. The first hearing drew more cameras than I expected. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and residents. Half were holding signs that read "Save Winston Grounds," the other half with "Protect Westlake." Meredith arrived in a navy suit, sunglasses on, every inch the picture of composure. When she saw me, her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Still enjoying your little rebellion?" she asked. I adjusted my cufflinks. "Immensely. You'll lose. Maybe, but at least I'll lose for something real." The hearing itself was chaos disguised as order. Lawyers sparred. City officials droned about zoning codes, and Meredith sat behind her attorney, like a queen directing her knight. But when my turn came, I didn't bring a legal argument. I brought stories, photos of rescue dogs adopted through the sanctuary, testimonies from volunteers, letters from children who'd visited and found joy in animals that loved them back without judgment. At one point, I noticed Meredith watching, her expression flickering, a crack in her porcelain armor. The judge recessed for deliberation. Outside, the air was electric, tension buzzing through the crowd. I was surrounded by supporters, cameras flashing, questions flying. Someone handed me a microphone, and before I could stop myself, I said, "This isn't about property." Itégate sabú. Who gets to decide what belonging looks like? The club was built to keep people out. The park was built to let everyone in. I'll take the second one every time. The clip went viral that night. Again, by morning. Time magazine ran a piece. The billionaire who turned a country club into a dog haven and started a war over class. But for every person cheering me on, there were 10 whispering about ulterior motives. That I was building a brand. That it was a vanity project in disguise. That I wasn't so different from the people I despised. And maybe they were right, at least in part. Because the truth is, revenge had tasted so sweet I hadn't noticed how addicted I'd become. Each victory over, Meredith filled me with something electric, something dangerous. Then came the night I saw her again, unexpectedly. I was at a charity gala downtown, not by choice, but by pressure from the PR firm that claimed I needed to stay visible. The ballroom was a cathedral of glass and chandeliers. A place where money floated in the air like invisible perfume. Meredith was standing near the bar, alone. No entourage, no camera-ready smile. Just a woman holding a half-empty glass of wine, staring at nothing. She saw me before I could decide whether to walk away. "You look tired," she said. "So do you," I replied. She laughed softly, a sound without sharpness for once. Funny how that happens. We both got what we wanted, and neither of us seems very happy about it. I didn't answer. She sipped her wine, then said, "You know, when I first moved here, I thought the club would save me, make me someone. I built walls because I was terrified people would see through me. See what?" Her eyes glistened. That I didn't belong either. The honesty of it startled me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The music drifted around us, a soft jazz cover of something we both pretended not to recognize. "You still have time to undo this," she said finally. "Sell it back, reopen the club. People would forgive you. I don't need their forgiveness." She studied me carefully, as if weighing whether to pity me or hate me. "Then what do you need, Matthew?" I didn't know. When I drove home that night, the question echoed louder than the engine. "What?" "Dites première nid." The next morning, Winston woke me by nudging my arm with his nose. Sunlight spilled across the bed. The sanctuary outside was already alive with movement, volunteers arriving, dogs barking, laughter drifting up the hill. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe I didn't need to win or belong, or prove anything, anymore. Maybe all I needed was this, the sound of joy, where there used to be silence. But peace has a way of inviting new storms. 3 days later, Ethan burst into my office, eyes wide. "You need to see this." He turned on the news. The headline hit like a blow. "Fire at Winston Grounds arson. Suspected. Flames devoured the screen. The sanctuary mice were burning." And in that instant, every trace of calm vanished, replaced by something darker than revenge ever was. Because this wasn't about pride anymore. It was war. The smoke rose like a funeral veil over everything I'd built. From the ridge above the property, it looked unreal, an orange monster swallowing memory. Heat shimmering through the night as if the past itself had ignited. I remember sprinting down the slope barefoot, Winston racing beside me, the acrid taste of ash cutting into my throat. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, growing louder, but not fast enough. The first thing I saw when I reached the gate was chaos, volunteers shouting, hoses flailing, dogs howling in panic. Someone was breaking locks with a crowbar, freeing the ones trapped in the kennels. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, my hands shaking, and dove into the smoke. The air was thick, alive with sparks. The old clubhouse once, the dining hall, where crystal glasses clinked over gossip, was a skeleton of flame. "Get the big ones out first!" I shouted, coughing. Through the haze, I saw Moya, one of the early volunteers, hauling open a gate, while tears streaked soot down her cheeks. Somebody said it. She gasped. I saw someone running down the drive before it started. My stomach clenched. "Did you see who?" She shook her head. "Just black coat, maybe a man. The fire spread faster than logic should have allowed. It was deliberate accelerants, maybe gasoline. The grass near the kennels caught like paper. The fire trucks arrived minutes later, but it felt like hours. By then, the damage was irreversible. We lost the old clubhouse, part of the deck, and 3 storage sheds filled with supplies. But no lives. Not one. By dawn, the flames were smouldering skeletons. I stood in the garage, my shirt down, my hands, my leg. Reporters already swarmed the entrance. Flashbulbs went off like lightning. Someone shouted questions, accusations, even. Mr. Kellen, was this related to the lawsuit? Do you suspect arson? Do you think this was retaliation from the former board? I said nothing. I was too tired to hollow. Ethan arrived soon after, his suit soaked from the rain. The investigators think it's deliberate, he said quietly. They're pulling security footage now, and he hesitated. The cameras by the west gate were disabled an hour before the fire. A silence settled between us, heavier than smoke. Later that morning, while the ashes still smouldered, Meredith showed up, in heels. Of course! She stood on the other side of the police tape, arms crossed, her face unreadable. I walked toward her, until we were separated only by the yellow line. Came to enjoy the show? I asked. She flinched, just barely. Don't, she said. Don't you dare. Did you do this? The question hung there like a blade. Her eyes flashed with something between rage and disbelief. You think I'd burn down your circus, wouldn't you? She stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the stench of smoke. I hate what you did to that club, Matthew. But I would never hurt those animals. Never. I searched her face for the lie but found only exhaustion. You made enemies, she said finally. More than you realize. Then she turned and walked away, her white coat swallowed by grey. For days after, I didn't sleep. The police ruled it arson, but no suspect. The cameras were wiped clean. Insurance covered buta dwanti what mattered and violate. I rebuilt anyway. Volunteers came back before the ashes cooled. Donations flooded in, people sending blankets, food, toys, letters. The community that had once mocked us now showed up with open hands. Even the mayor visited, promising support and justice. But I didn't want promises. I wanted the truth. So I hired someone, Alex, a private investigator who'd once worked cyber, forensics for the FBI. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who saw through walls and smiles alike. 3 days later, he came to me with a flash drive. You need to see this, he said. The footage was grainy, pulled from a neighboring house's security camera. At 1:37 a.m., a car appeared at the edge of the property. The driver got out, hood up, carrying a gas can, no face visible. But when the figure moved into the light, for a moment just a fraction of a second something glinted at their wrist. A gold bracelet. Thin, ornate, recognizable. Meredith's. I froze, staring at the screen. Alex watched me carefully. You want me to dig deeper? Yes, I said, my voice low. Quietly, but even as I said it, something in me hesitated. Meredith's face at the fire, the shock, the rawness, it hadn't looked like guilt. Still, I needed to know. A week later, Alex returned with a folder. He dropped it on my desk. You were right to hesitate, he said. Inside were bank statements, emails, surveillance stills, and one photo that changed everything. The bracelet was hers, but she wasn't wearing it. She'd given it away to her husband. Tom Bleat. The same man who'd been drowning in debt, who'd lost his seat on the club board when I bought it, who'd publicly blamed me for destroying his family's legacy. The same man who'd disappeared from the town's gossip circuit weeks before the fire. Where is he now? I asked. Mexico. Alex said. Faked a consulting job in Monterey. The arson's tied to a payment from a shell company linked to him. I closed the folder, slowly. A strange calm spread through me, heavy and cold. Meredith hadn't done it. But her husband had, and he'd used her name, her jewelry, her ruin. That night, I found myself driving to her house without meaning to. The mansion that once blazed with light now sat dim, quiet, like a stage after the play has ended. She answered the door in a robe, her eyes red, hair undone. What do you want? She asked, weary. To tell you, I said that I know it wasn't you. Her breath caught. Then who? Tom, she stared at me. The truth. Taking root behind her eyes. Her hand went to her mouth. No, he wouldn't. He did. She sank into a chair in the entryway, shaking. He said he was in Dallas that night. He wasn't. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, she whispered, he did it for me. Didn't he? I nodded once. When she looked up again, her eyes had hardened not with pride this time, but resolve. Then I'll fix it. How? She stood slowly. You forget, Matthew, I built this town. And I still know how to destroy someone quietly. As I left her house, a storm gathered over the hills, rolling like a promise. For the first time since the fire, I felt something unfamiliar. Not rage, not vengeance. Something dangerously close to hope. Because maybe, just maybe, Meredith. Blytine, where were really? Untouchable. We were going to finish what we started. The alliance began with silence. No grand declarations, no truce forged in words, just to people standing in the smoldering shadow of what they'd both lost, staring in the same direction for once. Meredith called me 3 days after our midnight conversation. Her voice was steady, stripped of performance. You, not at your office. Somewhere private. We met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place no one from Westlake Hills ever entered unless their car broke down nearby. The walls were yellowed from decades of cigarettes, the coffee burnt to perfection. She arrived without makeup, without jewelry, without armor. I almost didn't recognize her. You're sure it was Tom? She asked after a moment. Première no dead. The investigator traced to wire transfers, one from a shell account to a supplier for fire accelerants, another to a car rental under a fake name. But the ID photo. It's him. Her fingers tightened around her cup. My God, you could press charges. She gave a bitter laugh. Do you have any idea what that would do? The gossip alone would eat me alive. Besides, he dragged me down with him. Half the accounts were in my name. He knew exactly how to make me complicit. So what do you want to do? She looked up then, and for the first time, there was no venom in her eyes, only something fragile, dangerous, human. I want to burn him back, and that's how it began. We met, usually at me. Office late at night, long after the volunteers had gone home and the dogs were asleep. The smell of ash still lingered faintly in the air. She'd come with files, old business records, emails, bank statements she'd quietly copied before Tom locked her out of their accounts. Together, we pieced it all together like an ugly jigsaw puzzle, a decade of fraud, offshore laundering, and false charity foundations he'd used to fund his lifestyle. He didn't just try to destroy you, she said one night, spreading a pile of documents across my desk. He's been destroying people for years. Contractors, employees, investors. I think the fire was his way of, what's the word you used? Elegant revenge. Only he never understood elegance. Only destruction. She looked at me then, something unreadable, flickering behind her eyes. Funny how thin that line is. Weeks passed. The investigation grew teeth. Alex's team pulled digital trails from old servers. Cross-referenced transactions with shell corporations that trace back to one name, TB Holdings. It was almost insulting how obvious it was. When the evidence was ready, Meredith insisted on being the one to hand it over. He won't expect it from me, she said. If it comes from you, he'll just claim you're framing him. But if it comes from his wife, he'll crumble. She smiled faintly. Exactly. It was late February when she left for Monterey. She didn't tell anyone, not even Ethan. She booked the flight under her maiden name, carrying a single leather briefcase. Première au forêt. To send someone with her, but she refused. This is my mess, she said. I need to clean it myself. For 2 days, I didn't hear from her. Then, just after midnight on the third night, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It's done. He's in custody. That was it. No explanation. No drama. Just closure. As clean as fire. The news broke the next morning. Former Westlake developer arrested. For arson, fraud, and tax evasion. The media tore into him like wolves. Meredith's name appeared briefly, mentioned only as a cooperating witness. For once, she wasn't the villain in the story. I should have felt triumphant. But what I felt instead was quiet. When she returned, we met again at the sanctuary. It was late afternoon, the air gold and heavy with the scent of spring. The rebuilt clubhouse stood behind us, its fresh paint still gleaming. Dogs ran across the lawn, where charred grass had been months earlier, chasing balls and laughter. You did it, I said. No, she corrected softly. We did. She stood there for a long time, watching Winston wrestle with a mutt twice his size. 10 choses as dew of the bout. How close we came to becoming the same kind of people. I looked at her. We already were. We just changed which walls we were building. She smiled sadly. And which ones we burned. We walked along the edge of the property as the sun dipped lower, painting everything in amber. She told me about the trial ahead, the deals her lawyers were negotiating, the weight she was finally setting down. I told her about expansion, plans the shelters we wanted to open in neighboring counties, the donors coming forward, the idea of turning Winston Grounds into a foundation. You've built something that matters, she said. Something good, only because of what you tried to protect. She glanced at me, surprised. You think I protected anything? You did. You protected the idea of belonging, even if you misunderstood it. Her laugh was soft, genuine. You always have to win the last word, don't you? Only in that faute inconfortable. It was the kind that fills the air after a long storm, the kind that lets you breathe again. When she left that evening, she paused at the gate. You know, I still hate that you turned my club into a dog park. I know, but she smiled faintly. It's beautiful, and then she was gone. Month passé, and life returned known I was capable of keeping. The lawsuits faded. The sanctuary thrived. The staff doubled, then tripled. Children from nearby towns came for therapy programs with rescue dogs. The local paper ran a feature calling the Winston Grounds a miracle born from fire. But the night before the grand reopening celebration, I found something in my mailbox, a small, unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photograph, Meredith standing beside Tom's lawyer outside the courthouse, shaking his hand. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 3 words, "You were wrong." I stared at it for a long time, feeling the cold edge of realization slide between my ribs. Had she played me again? Was this whole redemption arc just another performance, her final act of survival? The dogs barked in the distance, the world soft with twilight. I folded the photograph, slipped it back into the envelope, and whispered to no one. Maybe I deserved it, because the truth was I'd built this place from vengeance. And vengeance, no matter how beautifully repainted, always leaves smoke behind. I didn't sleep that night. The photo lay on my kitchen counter under the thin light of the range. Who'd innocent, damning, impossible. The papier curled slightly at the edges, as if even it didn't want to stay flat in my sight. Winston lay nearby, restless, occasionally lifting his head to glance at me, sensing the unease in the air. The words "you were wrong" ran circles in my mind. Wrong about what? About her innocence, her loyalty. About the fragile thing I'd started to believe in, the possibility of redemption, even for people like us. Bidon, premier. Made a decision that felt less like choice and more like inevitability. I would find her, not to accuse, not to rage. Just to know her house was empty. For sale, sign on the lawn, mail stacked behind the glass door. A neighbor watering flowers told me she'd moved out 2 weeks ago. Didn't say where, the woman said. Left in a hurry. Strange, for her. I checked her usual places, the diner, the yoga studio she once mocked but secretly loved, the charity office downtown. Nothing. Her phone was disconnected. Her lawyer, when pressed, claimed attorney-client privilege but couldn't mask the discomfort in his eyes. Meredith Blythe is done with Westlake Hills, he finally said. She's starting over. I almost laughed. Starting over was what we'd both pretended to do, wasn't it? Building new foundations over the ruins we'd made of ourselves, except now I was standing alone on the ashes again. For weeks, I kept the photograph locked in my desk drawer. Premier Toldnoan. The Winston Grounds continued to grow, bloom, thrive, a place of joy carved from something rotten. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. Every interview, every feature, every smiling photo of me with a rescued dog, it all played like a redemption story the public wanted to believe, but I couldn't, not after that envelope. Then, one night, a call came from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. But some old instinct of ghost made me sway. Tu voice sadly half-voice. Where are you? I asked. Silence. A faint echo of wind. Traffic. Then je sais quiet. Somewhere that doesn't care who I was. Why did you send it? I had to. You could have just told me. I thought if you saw it, you'd understand. Understand what? She hesitated. Then, that forgiveness and survival. Don't always. Live in the same house. I gripped the phone tighter. You worked with him again. It wasn't working with him. It was finishing him. I frowned. You shook his lawyer's hand. Meredith. That's not finishing. That's dealing. I made sure his money went somewhere he'd hate, she said. Every cent of what's left of his assets is being funneled into shelters. Children's hospitals. Dog rescue. I signed the trust papers with his lawyer, so he'd never suspect it until it was done. You could have told me. You would have stopped me. I wanted to argue, to demand clarity, to name what she'd done betrayal. But beneath the heat in her voice was something else, a tremor of exhaustion, of finality. Why the message? I asked, finally. Because you're wrong then, almost tender. You thought I was trying to save my reputation. I wasn't. I was trying to save me. The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, don't call again. I need to disappear for this to stay real. Meredith, take care of Winston. And the line went dead. I stood there in the dark, the dial tone humming like a pulse in my ear, until Winston nudged my leg. Outside, the hills were quiet under a crescent moon. The kind of quiet that follows the end of something that was never supposed to exist. Over the next few months, pieces of her surfaced in strange places. A donation to a rescue center in Nevada Anonymous, but the check traced back to one of her old foundations. A news photo of a new shelter opening in Santa Fe. A woman in a sun hat turned just far enough that I knew it was her. And once, an envelope with no return address arrived at my office, containing only a dog tag engraved with the name Hope. I hung it on Winston's collar. The fire marks faded from the grounds. The grass grew back thicker. The laughter returned. But some nights, I'd walk the property alone, the air cool and clean, and think of her, the woman who had built gates and learned, too late, how beautiful it was to open them. Was I wrong about her? Maybe, but I'd learned something truer, that revenge and redemption sometimes wear the same face. And you only know which one you're seeing when it's already gone. On the anniversary of the fire, we held a celebration at Winston Grounds. Hundreds of people came, families, volunteers, strangers, who'd found belonging in a place that had once been a monument to exclusion. The dogs ran wild under the sun, the laughter rolled across the hills, and for the first time, I felt peace that wasn't borrowed. During the speeches, someone asked me what inspired the sanctuary's name. I smiled. It's named after my dog, I said. Betrayal. After an idea. What idea? They asked. That even the most exclusive gates can become open fields. If you're stubborn enough to tear them down. The crowd applauded, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking toward the ridge, the one overlooking the property where a woman in a wide hat stood for a brief moment before disappearing behind the trees. I didn't chase her. Some stories don't end. They just learn how to live quietly, like embers under soil waiting, glowing, enough. After that day on the ridge, life fell into a pattern so steady it felt like fiction trying to pretend at peace. The Winston Grounds became what I had once only pretended it was, a real sanctuary, not just for the dogs but for the broken, the cast-off, the unseen. Families came on weekends. Volunteers brought food, blankets, laughter. I hired staff people I trusted, people who didn't flinch when they saw a past still smoldering behind my eyes. But even peace has echoes. Every morning, when I crossed the property, the sun warming the dew off the grass, I'd glance at the ridge. Some days I swore I saw her there again, hat brim low, watching. Other days I convinced myself it was only the wind, stirring the tall grass. I never told anyone. Ethan came by one afternoon, carrying paperwork for a potential expansion. You realize this thing's getting too big for one man to manage, he said. That's the point, I answered. He grinned. Imait. You've got a waiting list of shelters wanting to affiliate, a city council offering land, national donors. You could turn this into a foundation, maybe even global. Maybe, I said, signing the page he handed me. My handwriting looked steadier than I felt. When he left, I stayed on the porch watching Winston chase a stick thrown by a little girl whose family had adopted one of our rescues. Her laugh carried across the field, and for a moment, everything seemed right. Then the mail arrived. Another unmarked envelope, cream-colored like the first. My stomach turned even before I opened it. Inside was no photo this time, just a short letter, written in a neat, careful hand. Matthew, you were right about one thing. The gates we build river go away. Thank you for showing me the other side. No address, no return mark. Just that single initial. Première starred. At it until the edges blurred. Winston barked at my feet, wanting attention, reminding me that life was still happening. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the photo and the dog tag. The drawer was nearly full now of reminders, of ghosts, of proof that stories don't end cleanly. Months turned into a year. The Winston Grounds Foundation opened branches in Austin, Santa Fe, Denver. Reporters stopped asking about the scandal and started asking about the model. The miracle of community rehabilitation, the irony wasn't lost on that the very woman who once kept people out had helped build a legacy defined. Older now, limped a little when he ran, but he still insisted on chasing every squirrel that dared cross his domain. The foundation had grown beyond me. Teams handled the branches in other states, grants rolled in without my asking. What had started as a monument to revenge had become something alive and self-sustaining. I could almost feel it breathing. Independent, like a creature that didn't need me anymore. And maybe that was the first time I let myself feel tired. Ethan noticed before anyone. "You're phasing yourself out," he said one afternoon, dropping a stack of reports on my porch table. "I'm letting it run itself," I answered. He gave me a look that was more friend than lawyer. "You built this place so you could belong somewhere, Matthew. Don't vanish just because it finally worked, but it wasn't vanishing that I wanted. It was quiet. It was the absence of needing to prove anything." That evening, after everyone left, I walked the trail that circled the property. The sky was a kind of bruise pink, the first stars starting to show. At the far edge, by the oak on the ridge, someone had left a bouquet white lily bound with a red ribbon. No note, no signature. The breeze off the hills carried the faintest trace of her perfume. I sat on the bench under the oak, the same one where I'd spoken to ghosts a year before, and thought of her again, not the woman who had shut gates, but the one who had learned, finally, to open them. She had become a myth in local gossip, sightings in Arizona, rumors of a foundation. In her name, whispers that she'd disappeared into the kind of anonymity she'd once feared most. A few journalists tried to track her down, but she stayed smoke scene, never held. And somehow, that felt right. I stayed on the bench until dark fully settled. The stars thickened above me, the air cool with the scent of cedar and earth. Winston lay at my feet, tail thumping once before he dozed. In Thanks a distance, the sanctuary cautioned by human hands. I thought about the arc of it all, how a man's wounded pride had bought a country club, how a woman's fear of falling had burned it down, how both had found, somewhere between ruin and mercy, a way to build something better. Maybe that was all redemption. Really was not erasing the past, but letting it coexist quietly with the present, without letting it win. When the wind shifted, something brushed against my boot. I reached down and found a small object half buried in the grass, a silver keychain, tarnished but elegant. It was shaped like a gate. On the back, faint but clear, were 3 words engraved. In her handwriting, "Leave it open." I sat there a long time, the keychain warm in my palm. No address, no explanation. Just her final sentence, the one that felt less like instruction and more like absolution. In the days that followed, I didn't tell anyone about it. I kept it in my pocket, a weight that reminded me to stay gentle, to let the world come and go as it pleased. The Winston grounds continued to hum with life dogs, children, laughter, beginnings. On the last evening of that spring, the volunteers held a small celebration. Lanterns strung across the fields, music, dancing, wine. At one point, a little boy ran up to me, holding a puppy I didn't recognize. "Mr. Kellen," he said, "this one's new." "She doesn't have a name yet." I looked at the puppy Golden, soft, eyes wide with trust, and I smiled. "Call her Meredith," I said. He grinned and ran off shouting the name, the puppy wriggling in his arms, and laughter rose around us like light. When the last lanterns dimmed and the crowd thinned, I walked to the ridge one, final time. The wildflowers moved. In the night breeze, whispering secrets to the dark. The oak creaked softly, the bench waiting. I sat, set the keychain beside me, and listened to the sanctuary breathing below hundreds of hearts, human and otherwise, beating in unison. Winston rested his head on my knee, sighing. I scratched his ear and whispered, "We left it open, and for the first time since the day I bought those gates, I realized he didn't to belong to it. Someone rose full. The wind carried laughter from the valley. Somewhere beyond the hills, perhaps in another town under another name, she was still building something out of ruins. And here, in this small corner of the world, the gate stayed open, just as she had asked. That was the real ending. No fear. Not vengeance, not even forgiveness. Just the quiet stories. On said free nevos again. The summer that followed was the gentlest one I could remember. The heat came soft that year, the kind that coaxed everything to grow instead of burning it brittle. Grass rolled thick and even down to the fence lines. The air itself seemed to hum. Most mornings I woke before sunrise and walked the grounds barefoot. The earth cool underfoot, Winston padding alongside me. I used to walk those paths to think, to plan, to wrestle with ghosts. Now I walked simply to listen to the wind, through the trees, to the easy rhythm of a place that no longer needed anyone to save it. The foundation had become something larger than I ever meant it to be. There were shelters across the country now, each bearing the same crest, a dog in mid-run, beneath an open gate. People sent letters, photos of rescues they'd adopted, stories of lives changed in small ways. They always wrote to thank me, and I never knew what to do with that gratitude. If they only knew what had really built this place, not kindness at first, but anger refined until it resembled love. Ethan came by one evening with a final round of documents. You could step away completely, he said, spreading the pages on my table. Let the board handle everything. You've done your part. I signed where he pointed. That's the idea. He nodded. You'll keep a seat if you want it. I don't. He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. Then you're free. When he left, I stood on the porch until the light faded from the hills. The Grund. Below glowed gold in the last of the sun, lanterns already being lit for the evening walk. Somewhere down there a child laughed, a sound pure enough to cut straight through time. I thought of how many versions of myself had stood in that same spot, angry, proud, wounded, certain he understood what belonging meant. They were all ghosts now, outnumbered by dogs and people who didn't know the story that had bought them this peace. The mail came just as darkness settled. One envelope, no stamp, no address slipped through the slot. Inside was a single photograph, the ridge at dawn, the oak tree in bloom, the bench beneath it empty. On the back, in her unmistakable script, were 4 words. Keep it open. Always no signature this time. She had disappeared for good. But the photo smelled faintly of wildflowers, of the same lily she'd left once before. I placed it in the drawer with the others, but I knew I wouldn't need to look at it again. The message had already taken root. Weeks later, on the anniversary of the day I'd bought the club, we held no ceremony, no press. Just volunteers and dogs and the quiet hum of a place alive, with forgiveness it didn't have to name. I walked the ridge alone that evening. The sky was wide and endless, the kind of blue that promised weather would hold. From up there I could see everything, the rebuilt kennels, the open fields, the gates swung wide and unguarded. For the first time, I felt nothing pulling at me from behind. I took the small silver one shaped mark, LS Gif. I hung it on the branch of the oak where the wind could move it. It caught the light and rang once, a soft, clean sound that carried down to the valley. Goodbye, I said, though it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like finally setting something down. Winston pressed against my leg, his muzzle grey now, his eyes still bright. We turned toward the path home. Below, the sanctuary lights flickered on, hundreds of small suns burning against the coming night. As we walked, I looked back once more. The ridge stood empty, the gate on the keychain glinting faintly in the breeze. The words came to me, they're not hers, not mine, just truth. You can't own peace. You can only let it happen. Basic. Time we reached the porch, the stars were out. I sat on the steps, Winston's head on my knee, the sound of laughter drifting up from the grounds. The night smelled of cedar and new grass. Then this piece. The mail came just as darkness settled. One envelope, no stamp, no address slipped through the slot. Inside was a single photograph, the ridge at dawn, the oak tree in bloom, the bench beneath it empty. On the back, in her unmistakable script, were 4 words, keep it open, always. No signature this time. She had disappeared for good. But the photo smelled faintly of wildflowers, of the same lily she'd left once before. I placed it in the drawer with the others, but I knew I wouldn't need to look at it again. The message had already taken root. Weeks later, on the anniversary of the day I'd bought the club, we held no ceremony, no press. Just volunteers a quiver place alive with verdintiftunum. I walked the sky was wide and endless, the kind of blue that promised weather would hold. From up there I could see everything, the rebuilt kennels, the open fields, the gate swung wide and unguarded. For the first time, I felt nothing pulling at me from behind. I took the small silchon from Micah Gate, Elas Jeef. I hung it on the branch of the oak, where the wind could move it. It caught the light and rang once, a soft, clean sound that carried down to the valley. Goodbye, I said, though it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like finally setting something down. Winston pressed against my leg, his muzzle grey now, his eyes still bright. We turned toward the path home. Below, the sanctuary lights flickered on, hundreds of small suns burning against the coming night. As we walked, I looked back once more. The ridge stood empty, the gate on the keychain glinting faintly in the breeze. The words came to me, they're not hers, not mine, just truth. You can't own peace, you can only let it happen. By the time we reached the porch, the stars were out. I sat on the steps, Winston's head on my knee, the sound of laughter drifting up from the grounds. The night smelled of cedar and new grass, of everything still possible. That was the end. I realized not the ending of a war, or a revenge, or even a love story, but the quiet conclusion of something human learning to heal. The gates stayed open. The world, at last, walked freely through, head on my knee, sighing. I scratched his ear and whispered, we left it open, and for the first time since the day I bought those gates. I realized the king longed to belong to it. The moon rose full of it. The wind carried laughter from the valley. Somewhere beyond the hills, perhaps in another town. Under another name, she was still building something out of ruins. And here, in this small corner of the world, the gate stayed open, just as she had asked. That was the real ending. Not fire, not vengeance, not even forgiveness. Just the quiet stories, or set free, never close again. The summer that followed was the gentlest one I could remember. The heat came soft that year, the kind that coaxed everything to grow instead of burning it brittle. Grass rolled thick and even down to the fence lines. The air itself seemed to hum. Most mornings I woke before sunrise and walked the grounds barefoot, the earth cool underfoot, Winston padding alongside me. I used to walk those paths to think, to plan, to wrestle with ghosts. Now I walked simply to listen to the wind, through the trees, to the easy rhythm of a place that no longer needed anyone to save it. The foundation had become something larger than I ever meant it to be. There were shelters across the country now, each bearing the same crest, a dog in mid-run, beneath an open gate. People sent letters, photos of rescues they'd adopted, stories of lives changed in small ways. They always wrote to thank me, and I never knew what to do with that gratitude. If they only knew what had really built this place, not kindness at first, but anger, refined, until it resembled love. Ethan came by one evening with a final round of documents. You could step away completely, he said, spreading the pages on my table. Let the board handle everything. You've done your part. I signed where he pointed. That's the idea. He nodded. You'll keep a seat if you want it. I don't. He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. Then you're free. When he left, I stood on the porch until the light faded from the hills. Sehr grund. Below glowed gold in the last of the sun, lanterns already being lit for the evening walk. Somewhere down there a child laughed, a sound pure enough to cut straight through time. I thought of how many versions of myself had stood in that same spot, angry, proud, wounded, certain he understood what belonging meant. They were all ghosts now, outnumbered by dogs and people who didn't know the story that had bought them this peace. The mail came just as darkness settled. One envelope, no stamp, no address slipped through the slot. Inside was a single photograph, the ridge at dawn, the oak tree in bloom, the bench beneath it empty. On the back, in her unmistakable script, were 4 words, keep it open, always. No signature this time. She had disappeared for good. But the photo smelled faintly of wildflowers, of the same lily she'd left once before. I placed it in the drawer with the others, but I knew I wouldn't need to look at it again. The message had already taken root. Weeks later, on the anniversary of the day I'd bought the club, we held no ceremony, no press. Just volunteers a quiet halvdaftonam. I walked the ridge alone that evening. The sky was wide and endless, the kind of blue that promised weather would hold. From up there I could see everything, the rebuilt kennels, the open fields, the gates swung wide and unguarded. For the first time, I felt nothing pulling at me from behind. I took the small silver one, chef, the upmakelasjif. Again, I hung it on the branch of the oak where the wind could move it. It caught the light and rang once, a soft, clean sound that carried down to the valley. Goodbye, I said, though it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like finally setting something down. Winston pressed against my leg, his muzzle grey now, his eyes still bright. We turned toward the path home. Below, the sanctuary lights flickered on, hundreds of small suns burning against the coming night. As we walked, I looked back once more. The ridge stood empty, the gate on the keychain glinting faintly in the breeze. The words came to me, they're not hers, not mine, just truth. You can't own peace, you can only let it happen. By the time we reached the porch, the stars were out. I sat on the steps, Winston's head on my knee, the sound of laughter drifting up from the grounds. The night smelled of cedar and new grass, of everything still possible. That was the end. I realized not the ending of a war or a revenge or even a love story, but the quiet conclusion of something human learning to heal. The gate stayed open. The world, at last, walked freely through.